A letter arrives at the French embassy in 1854. The handwriting trembles with desperation. "Please, send your armies to Madagascar. Depose my mother before she kills us all." It's signed by Prince Rakoto, the Crown Prince of Madagascar, begging foreign powers to invade his own kingdom to stop his own mother. 17 years earlier, in 1837, while Europe basked in the optimism of the Victorian era and America charged westward with dreams of manifest destiny, a very different reality was unfolding on a remote island in the Indian Ocean. On Madagascar, the fourth largest island on Earth, a woman rose to power. She did not inherit a crown. She seized it, and as her enemies fell, she built her throne from their bones. What followed would make the Spanish Inquisition seem merciful. Under her rule, half of Madagascar's population would vanish, and history would remember her by one name alone: Ranavalona I. The story begins in 1778 in the highlands of Madagascar, where a girl named Ramavo was born to humble parents in the village of Madagascar. She was nobody special, the daughter of a minor prince with no claim to power, no wealth, no prospects. In any other story, she would have lived and died in obscurity. But fate, it seems, had darker plans. When Ramavo was still young, her father discovered something that would change the course of history: a plot to assassinate King Andrianampoinimarina, the ruler who was uniting Madagascar's warring tribes. In a moment that would echo through the centuries, her father chose loyalty over silence, warning the king of the impending danger. Grateful for his life, the king adopted Ramavo into the royal family and arranged her marriage to his son, Prince Radama. It was meant to be a reward. Instead, it became the first link in a chain that would strangle a nation. The marriage was loveless from the start. Radama, who would become King Radama I, was a progressive ruler who welcomed European missionaries and traders. He modernized his army, abolished slavery, and opened Madagascar to the world. But Ramavo watched in growing horror as foreign influences crept into her homeland like a disease. Worse still, she could bear no children. In a society where a woman's worth was measured by her ability to produce heirs, Ramavo was failing at the most fundamental level. And when King Radama began executing potential rivals, including members of Ramavo's own family, the seeds of her future brutality were planted in soil watered with blood. For 18 years, she endured this humiliation, this powerlessness, but she was learning, watching, planning. She cultivated relationships with traditionalist nobles who despised her husband's foreign policies. She befriended military officers who yearned for the old ways. And when Radama fell ill in the summer of 1828, some whispered that his wife had finally found her moment. On July 27, 1828, King Radama I died in agony. Whether from syphilis, malaria, or poison, the truth died with him. But what happened next would live in infamy forever. According to Malagasy law, the throne should have passed to Rakotobe, King Radama's nephew. He was educated, intelligent, and favored by the European community. He represented continuity with his uncle's progressive policies. But Ramavo, she had other plans. Within hours of Radama's death, she struck with the precision of a serpent. Using her network of traditionalist supporters, she seized the royal palace and declared herself queen, taking the name Ranavalona, meaning folded or kept aside. But declaring oneself as the ruler and actually ruling are two very different things. What followed was a purge that would make Stalin proud. Rakotobe was the first to die, speared through the throat on Ranavalona's orders. His mother was next, starved to death in a palace dungeon. One by one, every member of Radama's family who might challenge her claim was hunted down and eliminated. Because royal blood could not be spilled, they were strangled, starved, or forced to drink poison. But Ranavalona was just getting started. At her coronation ceremony on August 12, 1829, she stood before her terrified subjects, wearing a crown of gold, and declared words that would echo through the ages. Never say, she is only a feeble and ignorant woman, how can she rule such a vast empire? I will rule here to the good fortune of my people and the glory of my name. I will worship no gods but those of my ancestors. The ocean shall be the boundary of my realm, and I will not sacrifice the thickness of one hair of my realm. Ranavalona's first target was everything her husband had built and stood for. She immediately reversed his policies, expelled European advisors, and declared war on foreign influence. The Anglo-Malagasy Treaty was torn up, trade agreements were cancelled, the modernization of Madagascar ground to a halt. But it was her war on Christianity that revealed the true depths of her cruelty. In 1835, she banned Christianity entirely. What followed was a persecution that would make the Roman emperors seem merciful. Missionaries were given a choice: renounce their faith or face death. Most fled the island, but the Malagasy converts had nowhere to run. The Queen's method of determining guilt was as ingenious as it was horrific: the Tangina ordeal. Suspected Christians were forced to swallow 3 pieces of chicken skin, followed by a poisonous nut from the Tangina tree. If they vomited up all 3 pieces of skin, they were declared innocent. If they died from the poison, their guilt was proven. If they survived but failed to vomit properly, they were executed anyway. According to historian Gwyn Campbell, this barbaric practice claimed 100,000 lives in 1838 alone. But for Ranavalona, it was just the beginning. As her paranoia grew, so did her creativity in dispensing death. Palace servants would tremble at her footsteps, knowing that a misplaced glance or poorly timed word could result in their immediate execution. Her favorite method was progressive amputation, cutting off fingers, then hands, then arms, keeping victims alive as long as possible to maximize their suffering. Others were boiled alive in giant cauldrons, their screams echoing through the palace courtyards as a warning to others. But perhaps most terrifying was her use of the cliffs surrounding the capital. Victims would be dangled by ropes over rocky ravines, their families forced to watch as the ropes slowly frayed. When the inevitable happened, the bodies would be left where they fell, food for wild dogs and carrion birds. In 1836, 14 Christian leaders who refused to renounce their faith were subjected to this fate. They were lowered over the precipice at Ampamarinana, their ropes cut simultaneously as crowds watched in horror. Their martyrdom only strengthened the resolve of the remaining Christians, but it also demonstrated Ranavalona's complete disregard for human life. Perhaps no single event better illustrates Ranavalona's descent into madness than the buffalo hunt of 1845. In a moment of royal whimsy, she decided that her court needed entertainment. She would organize a grand buffalo hunt, the likes of which Madagascar had never seen. What followed was a catastrophe of epic proportions. 50,000 people were conscripted for this royal adventure. Nobles, servants, slaves, and soldiers. They were given minimal supplies and ordered to build roads as they traveled, clearing forests and leveling villages to make way for the Queen's procession. For 4 months, this massive caravan wandered the countryside in search of buffalo. There were no food supplies beyond what could be extracted from villages along the way. As road builders fell ill and died, they were replaced by fresh recruits dragged from their homes. The death toll was staggering. 10,000 people perished from starvation, exhaustion, and disease during those 16 weeks of madness. And the ultimate irony? Not a single buffalo was killed. The entire expedition was a monument to royal caprice and human suffering. But Ranavalona's brutality wasn't random. It was systematic. She had transformed Madagascar into a machine designed to extract maximum labor from its population, while eliminating any threat to her power. The Fanon-Poana system, forced labor in lieu of taxes, became the backbone of her economy. Entire villages would be conscripted to build palaces, roads, and fortifications. Workers received no pay, minimal food, and were often worked to death. Madagascar's population plummeted from approximately 2.5 million to barely over 1 million souls during her reign. Some died in her wars of conquest, others succumbed to starvation and disease, but many simply vanished into the Queen's insatiable appetite for human sacrifice. The island became a prison where escape meant death and staying meant probable death. Trade collapsed, agriculture withered. The very fabric of Malagasy society began to unravel under the weight of her tyranny. Ranavalona's isolationist policies inevitably brought her into conflict with European powers. The French, who controlled nearby islands, saw Madagascar as a natural extension of their empire. The British viewed it as a crucial way station on the route to India. In 1845, a combined Anglo-French force attacked the port of Tamatave, confident that the Mad Queen's primitive forces would crumble before European military might. They were catastrophically wrong. Ranavalona's forces, trained by the French engineer Jean Laborde, himself a shipwreck survivor who had become the Queen's lover and military advisor, had prepared elaborate defenses. False-fronted native forts concealed much more substantial structures. When the Europeans attacked, they walked into a carefully prepared trap. 21 European soldiers died in the assault. Their heads were cut off, mounted on spikes, and displayed along the beach as a warning to future invaders. The message was clear. Madagascar belonged to Ranavalona, and she would defend it with rivers of blood. Even Ranavalona's own family lived in terror of her wrath. Her son Rakoto, born 11 months after her husband's death, and almost certainly fathered by one of her lovers, grew up watching his mother's reign of terror with growing horror. As he matured, Rakoto began secretly opposing his mother's policies. He would release prisoners, provide food to starving soldiers, and maintain friendships with the few Europeans who were allowed to remain on the island. His compassion made him popular among the people, but it also made him a target. In 1857, Rakoto and the French businessman Joseph-François Lambert hatched a plot to overthrow Ranavalona. They planned to stage a coup during a royal ceremony, with soldiers loyal to the prince surrounding the palace and demanding the queen's abdication. But Ranavalona had survived 30 years on the throne by trusting no one. Her network of spies had infiltrated every level of society, and she knew about the plot almost from its inception. When the conspirators struck, they found themselves walking into another of the Queen's traps. Most were arrested immediately and sent on forced marches through malaria-infested swamps. Many died, but Lambert escaped to tell the tale. Rakoto himself was spared, barely, but the message was clear. Not even family was safe from Ranavalona's wrath. By 1860, Ranavalona had ruled Madagascar for over 3 decades. She had successfully resisted European colonization, preserved traditional Malagasy culture, and maintained her nation's independence. But the cost had been almost unimaginable. Conservative estimates suggest that 2.5 million people died during her reign, more than half the island's population. Some perished in her wars of conquest, others died from starvation, disease, and the brutal conditions of forced labor. But hundreds of thousands were simply murdered, burned alive, poisoned, tortured to death, or thrown from cliffs for the crime of opposing her will. She had created a wasteland and called it peace. Villages lay abandoned, families were scattered. An entire generation had grown up knowing nothing but fear and death. Madagascar had become a monument to the corrupting power of absolute authority. On August 16, 1861, Queen Ranavalona died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 83. It was a gentle end for a woman who had shown no gentleness to others. Her death sparked celebrations across Madagascar, though few dared express their joy openly. Even her funeral became a scene of destruction. A barrel of gunpowder intended for ceremonial fireworks accidentally exploded, killing several mourners and destroying 3 buildings in the palace complex. It was as if the very earth rejected her presence. Her son Rakoto ascended the throne as Radama II and immediately began reversing his mother's policies. He reopened Madagascar to foreign trade, restored religious freedom, and attempted to rebuild what his mother had destroyed. But the damage was too great. Within 2 years, he was assassinated by conservative nobles who feared a return to foreign influence. Today, Ranavalona I remains one of history's most controversial figures. To some, she was a patriotic defender of Malagasy independence who successfully resisted European colonization. To others, she was simply a monster who sacrificed her people on the altar of her own paranoia and pride. The truth, as always, is more complex. Ranavalona was a product of her time and circumstances, a woman thrust into power in an age when showing weakness meant death. But she chose to respond to those challenges with a level of brutality that shocked even her contemporaries. Her reign stands as a dark legacy of what happens when power becomes an end in itself, when fear replaces justice, and when a single person's will becomes the law of the land. She proved that the capacity for evil knows no gender, no nationality, no limits saved for those we impose upon ourselves. In the end, Ranavalona I earned her place in history not through greatness, but through the sheer magnitude of her crimes against humanity. She remains, by any measure, the most murderous queen who ever lived, a woman who turned an entire island into her personal killing field and called it glory. The question that haunts us is not whether such monsters can exist. Ranavalona proved they can. The question is whether we have learned enough from her example to recognize the warning signs before the next tyrant transforms their kingdom into a graveyard.